All right, so hey everybody. So it's been a while since I've logged on here and done this, but there was a question that came in the chat about one of my other videos in regards to the Sabbath being a ceremonial law. And so rather than type out this response, I thought I would just go online and just speak the answer or speak my opinion to the answer. So the question was it was from an Adventist who was saying they're having a hard time understanding why God would put a ceremonial law in the Ten Commandments and then leave it us to decipher it. So understand something. First off, that was a tough question for me when I started the departure from Adventism. Was that that didn't make any sense to me, and I think I kind of speak to that in that ceremonial law or another one of my videos. But if you haven't seen that, I'll kind of speak to it. In the process of my departure, I came across a book, and this author I had ran into in my life. He was a former Adventist pastor and then had departed. And I recalled when he had departed, there was a great amount of controversy about that. And I was actually able to get in contact with him. Now, his name, give me 1 second and I will give you the answer. 1 second. All right, thanks. So this is the author. His name is Greg Taylor. He, as I said, he was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in the Ohio Conference, which is where I was a member, and I was able to get in contact with him, and I remember calling and speaking to his wife and explaining who I was and asking if she would please give him a message and have him give me a call back, which he did. And so this was really one of the questions that I asked him. Why would God do that? And before I kind of give you his answer, let's be clear about a couple things. One, the terms ceremonial law and moral law are not terms that we find in the Bible. These are terms, helpful as they might be, these are terms that we have used afterwards, and they very often allow us to describe or even to divide the law, as it were, into different sections. But there's nothing about these terms that, one, are biblical, or two, give us any indication of a hierarchy of them. Because the law was always viewed by the Jews and by Jesus as one big thing, as one complete component. Be that as it may, these deal with diet, these might deal with clothing, these might deal with hygiene, these might deal with how you deal with your wife or your children or your neighbor or God. It was all considered part of the law. But still, as an Adventist, it was really important for Adventists to create that distinction between the moral and the ceremonial. Because as Adventists, they need the Sabbath to remain. And so for them, since the Sabbath is so clearly described and illustrated in the Ten Commandments, we say this is the moral law. But understand something, you can't back that up. You can't support that. There's no biblical guideline to say this proves that it's moral. It doesn't. And as I said in my other video, if you compare it to the other ceremonial laws that many Adventists would be happy and to acknowledge these are ceremonial, good golly, it looks just like it. It acts just like it. But when I asked this pastor about this issue of why there'd be a ceremonial law in there, this was the answer that Greg Taylor gave me. And understand something, this is probably 13 to 14 years ago that this conversation happened. So I'm trying to I'm not saying this is the verbatim, but he started having a conversation about the law. But the Ten Commandment law isn't really the first law. When we go back and we go back and we go back, it started off with I think one term that I remember learning as I was making out my departure was the term a progressive law. That man itself had been prescribed by God a progressive law. And what that means is God didn't, in the Garden of Eden, for instance, the first law was just don't eat from that tree. That was the law. He wasn't saying to them, oh, by the way, don't commit adultery. There was nobody else here. Okay, there was nobody else here. So he wasn't having to say stuff like that. He wasn't saying like, I don't know, when you're going out here, don't put together two different types of fabric into one shirt. They were naked. But after sin came in, then we start having laws. A great example of that would be Cain and Abel. When Cain killed his brother, his life wasn't demanded of him right then, but instead he was cast away. Because as we look later, like in the Old Testament, if you take somebody else's life, your life is going to be forfeit. With Cain and Abel, there had been no law given, thou shalt not kill, but we see it progressively happening, okay? Another example would be just prior to the flood. Prior to the flood, there was, I believe that no one was eating any meat, at least godly people. Now, you forgive me here. If anybody needs, I can find this in Genesis. But the point I want to make to you is after the flood, and Adventists hate this one, but after the flood, God says to Noah, all right, now, anything that moves is food for you. Now, the Adventists want to think, oh, no, we've had the ceremonial law. That's why there were 7 clean and 7 of the clean and only 2 of the unclean. I can only tell you what the Bible says. And the Bible says that when after the flood, God said, anything that moves is food for you. Okay? So let's get back to what Greg Taylor is saying. And hopefully this is coming full circle. He said this statement, or to this effect, that when Jesus is being asked, of all the commandments, which is the most important one, Jesus answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he said, these are the 2 greatest commandments, and all the law and the prophets, you can finish it, all the law and the prophets hang on these 2. So for me and for Greg Taylor, as we talked, that's the conclusion, or that's what he started leading me, is that when we start looking at the Bible and we start looking at quote law, this is the heart and the mind. These are the organs. This is the real fundamental idea behind the law. Love your neighbor and love yourself. But love God and love your neighbor as yourself. But as time, well, how does that really work out? Especially with the more people you get, all of a sudden you have to start spelling things out a lot more clearly. And so we bring in more people, and then they start going, we need a little bit more. We need a little more, because these 2, that's not sufficient enough. Because I think I'm acting in a loving way towards you, God. And I think I'm acting in a loving way towards my neighbor. So could you give me a little more specifics? Well, now you see the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments come along, and the first 4 are theoretically your commandments that tell you what it would look like acted out loving God. And the remaining 6 would tell you what it would look like loving your neighbor, not lying to them, not stealing from them, not killing them, not taking something that belongs to them, or sleeping with their wife, and so forth and so on. And the first 4 about not taking the Lord's name in vain and remembering the Sabbath day. Okay? But as with a lot of things, that's not even enough. Even those 10 commandments, still not. I still have some questions. Can you spell some stuff out even more for us? And so they move over now to the book of the law. And the book of the law then goes into even more detail, like saying things like, all right, well, we'll take adultery for an example. So then if I sleep, and as disgusting as it might sound, if I sleep with an animal, that's okay, because no. Then the book of the law actually starts saying, okay, listen, if a man lays with an animal as he would with a woman, the animal and the man have to lose their life, I believe is what the prescription for that was. So the point being that we start with these 2 principles of love God and love your neighbor at the very top. And then we move down to the 10 commandments, which gives us, and I think about the first 2 commandments as being like literally the heart and the brain. That's exactly what I think about, the heart and the brain. 1 second. Sorry, had a quick phone call. So the first two commandments are really the brain and the heart. Without those, the whole thing falls apart. And then I take the 10 commandments as almost like the skeleton around that. And then the book of the law now becomes the rest of the flesh to make the body. Okay? But all these, and this is what I think Jesus meant when he said, these are the two, and all the law and the prophets hang on these two. You take one of those first two away, the whole thing crumbles down. So I do not believe that when we look at the book of the law or the 10 commandments, that God was just slipping a ceremonial law in there and that it was up to us to decipher it. I believe that with the Jewish people, the whole law was what they were to adhere to. The entire law is what they were to adhere to, whether it be ceremonial or moral or dietary, it was what they were to adhere to. But what's most important is that when Jesus comes along, we have an end of the law. Okay, we're not sitting here and we're not focused on that. And the thing that I think I want to draw your attention to is in the book of Galatians, probably in my departure from Adventism, probably the most important book, the most influential book that I read in my departure, was when Paul continues to talk about the law as being the schoolmaster. And when you start studying and you start looking at what, in the time that Paul is writing this, in what was a schoolmaster? What was this job? The schoolmaster was this unfeeling third party that would basically be hired by the parent to watch over the child, and they get them from home to school. And maybe they watch them while they're at school, and then when school's over, they bring them home, and they watch them the entire way. So imagine, like, as my kids, if they had to walk to school, and if I hire a schoolmaster or somebody to go with them, they're just watching them, saying, listen, you don't go over there. No. And you smack them. If you had a stick or something, you continue to guide them, and you force them on the path that they need to be on. But Paul makes a great point, is like, but there comes a point in time when the schoolmaster is no longer needed. And your attention needs to move away from the schoolmaster, and hopefully now you've learned some principles. And principles are a higher level. Like, I remember hearing it a long time ago. I wish I had the actual name of this thing, but a pastor had shown me a pyramid, and your rules and your laws are really, really at the very bottom. As far as like your growth and your understanding, like, this is your base, core, fundamental stuff. But as you continue to elevate and mature and grow, you continue to move up, and the pinnacle of it all is to live by principles. Like, I'm not going to always be around with my kids to be able to watch them and go, brush your teeth, eat your vegetables and go to bed on time. I can't. My hope is that in time, they understand the actual principle behind the importance of brushing their teeth. They understand the principle behind bathing on a regular basis, the principle behind telling the truth, and that they live by that. Because that is where we come. Now we're moving away from law into principles, and ultimately we're living it, but not because of punishment anymore, and the punishments that the law would prescribe, but now I'm living by faith. I'm not living because, well, this thing says I have to do that, and I'm afraid if I don't do it, the consequence, I am a son of the King. I am a son of the King. You and I, if we're believers in Christ, we are sons and daughters of the King. I hate to tell you this, but the consequence, it's not going to be so hard for the son or the daughter, okay? So now I obey the law for a different kind of a reason. It's not because the law and the prescription is going to come. I follow the law out of love. I follow it out of faith. And let me tell you something. This reality is, when you fully understand that and you fully grasp that, that's why you can look back. For me, when I look back at Adventism, to be an Adventist would have been very easy. To be an Adventist would have been very easy. Now, so you're thinking, well, hold on. I obeyed every law. I obeyed every law Adventist had, whether it be about not eating pork, and I'd have my wife drive over to a town an hour away so she could get marshmallows that were not made with lard. She would go to a special Jewish store to get marshmallows that weren't made with lard. Why? Because I wanted Rice Krispie treats, but I knew that it was wrong for us to eat pork. Okay, so you're not going to find somebody that was following the rules of Adventism more than me. Okay, but the thing is, when you live under that law, you tend to feel a little good about yourself. You tend to feel a little better about yourself than you probably should because, well, I followed that one, check, that one, check, that one, check, that one, check. Okay, you feel pretty good about yourself. But there's something to be said when you start setting aside the law and you try to start living by the principle behind it. Because you see what I'm saying? When there was nothing in the Garden of Eden, they were living by principle to a degree. And then as sin came in, they started having to get more and more laws. And now we're kind of moving the opposite way. We're moving to a point of principle now. I'm not following a list of rules that tell me what I can do and when I can do it and how many I could. I'm now living by a principle idea. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is far more challenging. Living by a principle rather than law is far more challenging. Some of you may be seeing in this video that I have a tattoo. I didn't have that tattoo as an Adventist, nor would I have got it because I really prescribed to the Old Testament, not to marking the bodies for the dead and things like that. But when I start living under principles, I start understanding things a little bit differently. When I see in the Old Testament, it's telling me very specifically not to commit adultery. That's fine. But Jesus himself starts raising the bar into a principle territory. And that's when he says, well, okay, so I'm telling you, you think if you don't sleep with another man's wife, I say if you look at them with lust. He's not trying to give you more laws. He's trying to show you that there's a principle that's at stake here. Not the obeying the letter of the law. There is a principle that we need to be focusing on. You say, if I kill this man, then I've sinned. He said, if you hate them, you've killed them. We're moving from law to principle. So for my friend who asked this question about, well, why would he put this ceremonial law in there with the moral? That's an Adventist thing. That distinction, I would recommend to you that you start understanding that the law was all one thing. Granted, there were different areas of your life that it was applying to, and there were different punishments, which is another thing. It kills me when they say all the law is the same. This is simply not true. All law, if you break a law, it would be sin. I could give you that, but not all law is the same. That's why certain laws, if you broke them, all you had to do was kind of wash your hands and go to the temple and have the priest look at you, and then you could go on your merry way. Other sins, if you committed them, it cost your life. And I am of the opinion that if two different laws bring about a life, it could cost your life, and other not. There's clearly a difference there. I'm not trying to say that therefore you should do any of those things. My point is, it drives me nuts when people go, all the law is the same. It is clearly not. All that to say, Jesus did away with the law. We now no longer live by the law in the same way. And that right there, that idea, just an Adventist hears that and they just start having a fit because we have to have a law. So it's okay now? No, it's never okay, because I live by principle. I live by principle that I love my neighbor as myself. Therefore, it's not right that I go out and cheat on my wife. It's not right. That would be wrong. That is not a principled life. But for the Sabbath, if you're going to try to say that is still in effect, well, then you need to go ahead and bring in all the other ceremonial laws too. And this is what the book of Galatians is about. This is what the book of Romans is about. When he's saying you just want to go ahead and you want to bring it all back. Well, if you're going to bring any part of it back, guess what? You're bringing the whole thing, because you cannot pick and choose the ones that you want. It's all or it's nothing. And that is a theme that you see continually through the New Testament. So I hope this answered the question. I hope it gave you some clarity. Please feel free to drop any questions in, and I'll answer any more that I can, either in writing or another video. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.